Hello folks, welcome to my YouTube channel, Watercolor Impressions. This week we are going to learn how to do harborfront scene facing the city view. Before you go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. I'll provide the drawing template and reference. Check my description download so you guys can follow with me in this tutorial with me. So I did my drawing really light so I can see through when I put down my wash. So I'm pre-wetting the paper here and there, so I don't know where it went, but it kind of gives this loose and odd edges for me. So I also put down some yellow ochre to warm up the white bits here and there, and you can see it looks really dull in our reference, but I'm going to make sure that I'm going to introduce some colors so that it doesn't look boring, because when you paint as it is, it's going to give this monotonous tone, and it also gives this illusion of not providing originality in your painting. So this is why I change a lot of things in my paintings, and it is also your painting, so you can come up with your own way of expressing your painting as well. So let's focus on the water. So for the water, I'm using a light cobalt blue at the midground, but as it comes to the foreground, I'm making sure to leave some white bits for the kayak people or the paddle boats. And when it comes to the foreground, I'm using cobalt blue and a little bit of cerulean blue to increase the pigment consistency at the bottom. So that way, it kind of gives illusion of depth from creating and taking us into the painting. So I'll let the wash sit down for a bit and it dried out. So I'm using the second wash on my sky because it went really light, the value kind of changed. So I pre-wet the paper again using cobalt blue at the bottom, and at the top I'm introducing a little bit of cobalt blue at the top as well. So the whole scene has a little bit of blue tinge, so I want to make sure that I'm wearing my tinges using a lot of blues in my scene. And I'm also using tissue paper to get rid of some of the clouds, so I kind of get some edges, a really different variety of edges in my painting. And even though you can see we put a lot of colors, it went dull. So this is what I meant by you have to sometimes overwork your values in order to the value to come through. So now I'm focusing on the background building, and if I would have done this painting again, I would have introduced a lot of pale blues, but I introduced a little bit of darker blues because I want to stand the cityscape as well. Since I'm from Toronto, I'm proud of my city, so I want to make sure the city stands by itself once I finish this wash. And you can see whenever you paint cityscape, try to think as a shape, as one shape. If you try to see as every single shape, you're going to be lost in details and it's really hard to paint. And since it's also in the background, so I'm also making sure to have my values, and I'm also changing my background as well. It's not as it is compared to my reference. So the CN tower, and it have to stand by itself, so I'm making sure that it also having crisp really confident marks in my CN tower. And I'm also treating this as a single shape. There's only two white bits, one at the top and one at the bottom. You can see why I left that white space on the midground of the right hand side, because I want to add those trees. So for the trees, I started with the light wash. Before it dries out, I want to introduce my midtones. So you have a mere seconds to paint this. It's kind of cloud, so as soon as you put down a wash, you have to do it right away, because it gives this impression and it gives this loose confident strokes in the watercolor painting. You can't replace it by painting 10,000 strokes in your brush strokes. So I'm also making sure it's dark as possible. It also helps to frame our paddle riders on the foreground building, foreground as well. So I'm also making sure to add some tree trunks, and which is on the top of the trees. So when I squint my eyes, I realized that the wash on the water went really pale. So I'm going to introduce the second wash, because whenever I do water, I usually making it darker. So I'm making sure that I want to capture that water with the right value. And I'm focusing on the people now, and the three people who are in the foreground are my major figure. The rest of the figures, they kind of act as lead-in or the background elements for me. So whenever I do figures, I want to make sure that the figures in the closer to the midground, the foreground, are the people which I put a lot of effort on. And I also added another figure in the foreground, and I also felt that the kid is out of proportion, so I'm going to leave it as it is. And there's going to be a lot of reflections on the water on the foreground. So I'm pre-wetting the paper, and so let's add some marks in the distance, and it's really subtle. And I'm adding my reflections for the CN tower, which is reflecting all the way to the foreground, and it's also going to act as a lead-in. So one of the really hard thing to paint in watercolor is creating water, the illusion of water, because you have to come up with your strokes in such a way that the reflection is simple, yet it looks realistic. So you can see I'm focusing on the foreground reflection as well, and you just have to break it out in such a way that it's not the shapes are same all across the reflections. So it's going to be lighter in the distance. As it comes to the foreground, it's going to be darker, and you can see. And I'm also making it in such a way that in a really impressionistic way, I'm not focusing on the strokes exactly as in the reference. As I said, it's your painting, so you're going to express the way you want in your painting as well. But yet you have to follow and respect perspective as well as the reflections, how it reacts in the reality. You can see this reflections of the trees, which is going to be darker, and I'm making sure that to leave some white bits here and there, so that kind of gives the illusion of reflections underneath the water for the trees as well. And you can see now you know like why I left that two parallel riders, because it also helps to break down the big darker shape on the trees as well. So I'm making sure to add some darker pigment at the bottom of the boat as well as the bottom of the trees. And you can see as soon as we added that, we kind of created that anchoring on the water. So one thing we have to keep in mind while painting waters and watercolors is to have some faith and keep going, because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But eventually we have to try to break down our reflections and make it look realistic as well as. And sometimes when you're painting for a while, if you see the waters after you paint your reflection, it doesn't give that impression, but when you see from a distance, it gives the beautiful impressions of reflection and waves in our painting. So this is the last bit. I usually add it and wait till the end, and just what I'm talking about is the white paint. You can see as soon as we put that white bits on the paddle boat, everything started popping up. Even the paddle riders came to the foreground plane as well. While using white paint, using it sparingly so that you can bring back some of the planes. You can also use masking tape. That also helps you to bring back the highlights back. So I usually have the tape on my watercolor paper just to see how my painting going to look like when it's framed. And you can see it also gives this crisp hard edges on a watercolor paper, and it gives that impression of how a painting looks like. And you can see as soon as I took out the paper, the painting kind of came alive, and you can see it gives that staccato look in our painting. So now it's your turn. Take my drawing template and reference, and let's see what you can come up with. Thanks again for watching this Harborside watercolor painting tutorial with me. Let me know what you guys think of this video in the comment section. If you want me to cover any of the subjects in watercolors, write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com or comment below. Before you go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please share with your friends and family. And good luck with your painting, folks.